calling from a 214 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Adam from Manchester, New Hampshire.
Adam from Manchester, New Hampshire. What's happening up there? My understanding is that the Trump people have all evacuated from New Hampshire.
Just a little bit. I'm new to New Hampshire, actually, so I'm just trying to enjoy this England fall and not let this election faze me too much, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay, what's on your mind?
So I don't know if you all saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's...
Can you get off your speakerphone? Are you on a speakerphone?
AirPods, is that better?
And the AirPods stink, but yeah, go ahead, keep talking.
Okay. So AOC did an Instagram story over the weekend and kind of went after Jill Stein. I'm not sure if you all saw that.
I saw part of it.
Okay. I think she had some criticisms of Jill Stein that maybe could deem valid. There's a harsh word for her, namely she called Jill Stein predatory, and that the Green Party hasn't really grown any of its base or anything like that. So that being what it is, I'm a Palestinian American. I voted for Democrat, progressives, and non-progressives since I was old enough to vote. My first election was for Barack Obama. So it's just getting super hard to stomach this much further. I mean, I don't want to regale you with the trials and tribulations of my family and friends in Palestine, but I'm sure, listeners in the majority report can only imagine. So I just, on the Jill Stein bit, if you want to claim she's predatory and doesn't do enough to build the Green Party, that's fine. That's fair criticism, totally worthy of debate. But when AOC is being asked the question with the context, and the context of the question I think she was posting on her Instagram story was, what would you tell friends who want to vote for Jill Stein, something of that nature? And then she answers like she's a predator. How do you expect voters like me, or Arab, or Muslim, or Palestinian voters to take you seriously? Because AOC has been the chief surrogate of Joe Biden the last few months. Throughout a time where, in a just and a fair world, Biden would be on trial for, genocide enablement in a world court. And then, she's getting here telling us to get behind him, and then Kamala Harris is his successor. I just don't get the rhetoric from the progressive left. And, this equivocation that we're making on the matter of genocide in terms of, what's good for us here in America. And
okay. All right. Let me address what you're saying. Because I think this is, and I've actually, over the years, and certainly within the context of this, let's separate a few things. Okay. And we'll address each one of them. One, the question of Jill Stein. Two, the question of AOC as to whether you should listen to AOC. And three, the question of what is the relationship between one's vote and changing policy, if that's what they want, if that's what you do want to, or what does one use one vote for? As far as Jill Stein, okay, distinct from who says it, I don't know if I would use the word predatory. I understand why one would use that, more from the perspective of she went and fundraised to do a recount following the 2016 race and raised millions of dollars and did not do it. I think it was just to pay off campaign debt. And I do think, without a doubt, it's simply inarguable. The Green Party has diminished in power over the past 25 years. I say this as someone who voted for Ralph Nader as a way of, and I did it in New York. To be fair, and I vote swapped with Florida, or I supposedly did back then. The internet, you pledge. But the Green Party is a shell of what it was then. There's been no organizing in between elections. It just come out every 4 years, supposedly to maintain the 5%. All right. So for the sake of of that, let's put that aside. I think there's nothing non-factual about her assessment of the Green Party.
I would even add that with regards to Palestine specifically, I mean, Jason Call from them pointed out Nura Erakat was considered for VP on that ticket, and was going to try to say, this is Jason Call from Green Party. The proposal was that if Nura joins the team as VP, it would be under the condition that the Stein campaign would withdraw from the election should the Democrats secure a permanent ceasefire and offensive arms embargo. And he says, and I think this is insane, and I don't think AOC is a great messenger for this stuff, but I agree with her about this. We rejected it because you cannot trust the Democrats or Israel to keep their word. Okay, I mean, if you secured the permanent ceasefire and offensive arms embargo, I mean,
that would be about earnestly
and then
leveraging power.
We would be sabotaging the entire election for the Green Party, both now and in 28, given up ballot lines we have earned. It is not possible anyway. Like those things. That's, to me, like, I would have been very impressed if they had Nura Erakat on, got all that attention in, say, Michigan, and then secured a policy shift from the Democrats and then said, fine. That would impress me more for 2028. But
that would be leveraging. That would be actually like using, like developing power and using it.
Yeah.
In terms of whether AOC is like a good spokesperson for this, I mean, like the facts are the facts about the Green Party. That's just the fact. I mean, if you and frankly, like, from my perspective, you know, whether AOC is the right messenger, she has been supporting Biden. She's going to support Harris. She's a Democrat and wants to support her party and also wants to defeat Donald Trump. What's more, I think, like sort of like, you know, telling is like why I am supportive of voting that way. Now, I will say this, that it makes sense to me that there are people who feel I cannot stomach voting for, I think it was an easier assessment to make in terms of Biden.
Yeah.
Let's just put that aside. Let's just, for the moment, for the sake of argument, say Harris and Biden are the same person, okay? And they have the exact same power right now to run our foreign policy. That's not the case, but I'll put that argument aside for a moment, okay? It is understandable to me to say, emotionally speaking, I cannot vote for, I can't pull the lever for Biden-Harris, okay? Emotionally speaking, I can't do that. And you know, I'm not going to sit here and criticize you for having that emotional reaction. I will say, generically speaking, that is a complete misunderstanding of what voting is about. And voting is about bringing about some type of change. That's what politics are. And you have to make an assessment, or not you specifically, but one does. When I look at, and I'll make this argument, you know, separately, that Biden and Harris are not the same people right now. But when I look at Trump and I look at Harris, one of them is going to be president. That's just simply a fact. Jill Stein has no better chance of being president than I do. And someone can say, well, if you guys supported Jill Stein, other people might. Well, if people supported me too, I might be president. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so the point is that, is there a 1% chance that Harris is better than Trump on Israel? And if I'm going to vote, that's what I'm going to use my vote for. Is I don't like one vote ain't going to make a damn ass difference, but teeny tiny. But it's going to, you know, it's the exercise of one arrow that you have in your quiver of political power. And that's what a vote is. Mm-hmm. It's a hammer.
I think all that's granted. Everything about the Green Party, everything you said about voting, like, I think I get all that. Well, what I'm maybe not feeling as a Palestinian American is permeating kind of through all the rhetoric right now is just sort of like the mood. I don't know, maybe you described it as the emotion, but the mood and like what that mood sets for like the future. I mean, it's hard, right? It's not easy, but when Kamala Harris gets asked in an interview, like, will you change from Biden's policy on Gaza? And it's like, I think she just said no. I don't want to read into that too much, but she's telling us exactly what's going to happen. And I just want to add, like, there's a mood. Like, I'm a second generation Palestinian American. My wife's the first generation Palestinian American. I mean, we lived through Trump. We used to live in Texas, and like seeing like a Trump, yard sign on someone's yard back in like 2016 or whatever, when he was talking about banning Muslims, like the emotion and the mood that evoked from her, saying like, oh, this person supporting someone who like literally hates me to my guts. Like, I'm telling you, Sam, and everyone else, like, as we drive through our streets of New Hampshire and see Harris Waltz signs, like, that's the same, like, it's that same sort of like disconnect there. Like, this politician in no way can represent me. And I guess what concerns me is Jill Stein is Jill Stein, but the reason Jill Stein is sort of anything right now is because mainly the position she's taken on Palestine and has probably attracted.
I mean, she had the same, listen, she's going to do the same numbers as she did in 2016.
And can I just add, first of all, this is not going to be the show that tells you how to vote as a Palestinian American. I mean, at least from my perspective, I don't think that we can do that. We can't understand the pain that you're going through even as we cover this. But I will say, like, one, I think I see your criticism at least about AOC in the sense that, like, I think she miscalculated in the weeks after the debate where she decided to get, and Bernie did this too, get some concessions from Biden on policy, and then they went really hard for him when the rest of the party was abandoning him. Then does that undercut their full-throated support for Harris as maybe somebody who would be a break from Biden, where the base was so disgusted with Biden? Progressives, I guess, are supposed to represent the base, and that wasn't really necessarily reflected in that time period where they were trying to flank him on domestic progressive policy priorities. I think it could have made a real difference if they were leveraging that moment with Harris to get some of these things, where this is where I want people to read in between the lines a little bit more. And again, this is different from your voting. I just want to probably give some hope here about a change in policy. The Harris campaign has calculated that they don't think that they need to address this issue concretely as of right now, or at least they're going to stave it off for as long as possible to make sure that AIPAC money doesn't flood into the campaign. They don't feel like they need to address this more concretely. And that's awful. And it's wrong. And it's also speaks to the uniqueness of her position, but I wish that she was more explicit on, say, like arms embargo, right? But they're not doing that because of that calculation that they're making. I don't think that you should take what she said in that interview on face value about her policies being the exact same as Biden. They're trying to leak this and have people read in between the lines. There was a Washington Post article over the weekend about Phil Gordon and how he's skeptical of Netanyahu, about how she's open to conditioning aid to Israel, and that's something that she would consider as president. Now, the clips that you describe are the ones they're going to travel, and that's in part by design. They want the pro-Israel money to not spend in their races. And you're already seeing it in Michigan, which is why she's going to have to make a decision at a certain point. The Republican operatives are playing ads saying how pro-Israel she is as a rat-F campaign in Michigan to get people to be a little bit less enthusiastic. All I'm saying is that it's really, really frustrating to see her repeat the Biden administration line, but we have to remember it's not her administration, it's not her staff. She's essentially a ceremonial piece for them. And two, the Biden's history is just, he's historically one of the most right-wing Democrats throughout his career, whatever you place him in time. And part of that has been his hawkishness, especially as it relates to Israel. If you go back and read, Jeet here had a piece from February, it's not relevant to Harris, but about how Biden eulogized Scoop Jackson, who was a anti-communist war hawk in the 70s. And Biden gave his eulogy in 1983, and he was a guy that was so pro-Israel that basically he wanted them to get a blank check, that he was a Democrat, but he was such an anti-communist that he thought like Nixon and Republicans
Democrats were
isolationism.
super anti-communist at that time.
And it was like about Israel was supposed to be some sort of way to stave off the Soviet Union in the Middle East. And so it was like, give them a blank check, whatever. Biden has supposedly talked about him as being a formative person in his view of Israel. And you can I tweeted that out. Jeet had the piece in February 2024 about Biden's Cold War perspective. But this comes on top of the other anecdotes that we've told you about how he undermined Obama and Hillary Clinton in getting tougher on Netanyahu, about how he waxes poetically about Golda Meir. Biden and Harris, it's frustrating, and they're not the same person. Obama would have been better in this situation. All we're looking for, I think, in terms of improvement are that level of kind of just more competence. And no matter what I say, again, this is not about your vote, because I can't empathize. I can empathize. I can't understand the position that you're in. But just to give you a sense, is I do think this concretely, that she doesn't have these ideological predispositions, and that should give activists hope that we can move her in a way that, for the first time in my life, I was considering voting third party in New York State. I've never done that. For the first time in my life, that's how disgusted I was with Biden. But I don't feel that way about Harris. And it's not just wish casting. It's based on concretely his history and her lack of that history.
I mean, ultimately it comes down to the idea of, and I would look. There's only so much you can get from an article like this, but I would recommend people read this piece. It's in the Washington Post. Trusted aid would play a key role in the Harris review of U.S.-Israel policy. Let me just read the relevant part. Harris' office said it would not discuss her potential policies should she become president. We're not going to address hypothetical policy questions. She remains the vice president of the United States and stands by the Biden-Harris administration policies. That is what Dean Lieberman, Harris's deputy national security advisor for strategic communications, said in a statement. Let's be clear. If I'm vice president and I'm running for president, I am not going to set a precedent of my vice president has the ability or the justification to go out and fundamentally say, I'm doing a different policy than the president. Because nothing she says right now is going to change anything. Now, I do not believe there will ever be, under a Harris administration, an arms embargo of Israel. I do believe that there could be weapons that are conditioned and aid that is conditioned on certain things, and that would include the possibility of offensive weapons not being sent to Israel. It's one thing to say I'm going to do an arms embargo. I'm not going to have. And I'm saying from the perspective of Harris. If it was up to me, I'd end aid tomorrow. Period. All of it. But from the perspective of what we're dealing with in terms of the range of action that we could reasonably expect from a president.
I just want
go ahead.
I just wanted to say this. I think all of y'all's points are, well taken, and I sort of probably agree with nearly everything. I would just say, from speaking from the perspective of people like me, it's just we're just thirsting for that one thing, that one comment, maybe that one interview where she would say hey, in January when you're sworn in and based on the new developments, with your administration, would you instruct the State Department to reconsider the Leahy law?
100%.
And she'd be like, oh yeah, just something
She's
little
gonna
like that where you're in for it.
have to do something like that. I mean, and if she doesn't, I think that's really, unfortunate.
I think there is more latitude for her to do that, and frankly, they should have. I think they screwed up at the Democratic National Convention.
But but they like those headlines too. That's my point, though. There's a part of them that likes the fact that they can look like they're tamping down these protests. I mean,
I suspect that also is like they think that there is, they've made a political assessment of like where the electorate is and where the greatest risk is. And that's my guess anyways. I don't know.
It's not me as one of the 10 Palestinians in New Hampshire, probably. So.
Well, no, but I mean, I think they're saying in terms of the actual votes lost. I mean, look, you also have to remember, like, we as a country, first order, were responsible for the deaths, depending on whose numbers you use, whether it's Defense Department at the low end or very reputable sources on the high end, anywhere between 200,000 and 1 million Iraqis. And I can tell you that I don't believe there was, I mean, you could argue that the Democratic primary was in some way informed by the Iraq War. And to some extent, maybe the 2006 congressional races, although I contend that it was much more about Mark Foley and child predators. The American public, broadly speaking, doesn't seem to care about the deaths of people who are not in the United States, and probably less so, you know, if they are brown or black. And I mean, I'm talking broadly speaking. I think there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in this country who are, and I think there's probably tens of millions of people who care, but not enough that, you know, they're going, this is going to be their fundamental, you know, thing that they vote on. And the question then becomes, at least in terms of like voting, and again, you know, I totally understand the idea of like, I just can't pull this lever for this person. But in terms of voting as an outcome, there is certainly 1% chance, I think it's actually greater, but this is all it takes for me, 1% chance that Harris is going to be better than Trump on this. I mean, Trump is using Palestinian as a slur. And listen, there's a reason why he can do that and no one cares in terms of like what it's going to cost him for voting, because it's not going to cost him a single vote. Just the idea that we're having this conversation means that there is slightly more power. There may be not enough, but there is slightly more power that can be applied towards Harris than to Trump. And it's obviously not necessarily 2 months out from the election. It may not be a day out from the election, but there are more people who are similarly situated to you, who are constituents of Harris, than Trump. And that means to the extent that there's any power, and there are in many instances there's not enough power to change the course of an administration. But to the extent that any power exists, it exists with Harris constituents, not Trump constituents. And that's, you know,
same answer as to why people go, why don't these Palestinian protesters go to Trump events? Well, that's why.
Yes. And I mean, the irony is that's also why, like, ultimately, there's going to be a more opportunity. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to actually work, but there's going to be more opportunity with Harris. I mean, look, Biden dropped out. And for the biggest factor was that he was too old. But had the Gaza not been going on, it would have been much tougher to get him out. I believe that.
Yep.
And
she knows that.
And so, like, you know, It's not a direct one-to-one correlation, but this is the way that, like, politics work. It doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. 80% of people want to increase Social Security payments. The 70% of, Democrats probably want single-payer health insurance. That doesn't mean that's going to happen. But it means that it has a much better chance happening with a Democratic administration than it does a Republican one.
Yeah.
That's the best I can tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, point taken. I appreciate it, and yeah, thank you all for your show. And yeah, it still matters to hear people talking about Gaza and thinking about this stuff critically. So I appreciate you all.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks for the call, and my heart goes out to you and your family.
Yep. What were you going to say from that article, though? I'm curious what your takeaway was, though.
Well, I mean, there were two things. One was they're really emphasizing that she's the vice president.
Yep.
And again, I think it's very unlikely that a future president, in her mind, she's a future president, is going to set a precedent where the vice president can speak out publicly against her administration's policies.
She's very conscious of that. That was part of what she worried about with Shapiro, was his undermining.
Well, I think every nominee does that, but certainly
She must have learned.
you don't want to set
that.
you
Yeah.
don't want to set a precedent.
No.
Like
Also, she saw how, the Biden administration sidelined her for the most part. And they also gave her tasked her with things like, but you're going to do this press conference on the border really early on. Some of their most difficult issues. They didn't give her abortion spokesperson, right?
Right.
Which would have been an easy thing to do with the first female vice president. They undermined her.
Okay, so this is in that Washington Post piece. While Harris has not articulated the specifics of her foreign policy, she is expected largely to continue Biden's approach in many areas if she wins, including supporting Ukraine against Russia, pushing back against China's assertiveness, seeking to build international alliances. The area where Harris is most likely to differ from Biden, allies and analysts say, is on Israel. Despite her public support for Biden's position, her private comments and concerns as the war has unfolded suggest she would be open to challenging Israel more directly, according to people familiar with her views who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private conversations. The best developed policy in terms of what could change is on the Middle East because they know what's not working, says Ivo Dalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, who is known and worked with Gordon. This is her chief national security advisor, Phil Gordon, who could very well have a even bigger position in her presidency.
He's supposed to expect to stay on as national security advisor. It was reported last week.
There is plenty of evidence that the Harris administration and Phil would urge a fresh look at how we approach our overall Middle East policy, which they're pretty clear now has to have an end state for Palestinians at its core. Now, look, we read a lot of stuff about Biden being secretly pissed at Netanyahu and et cetera, et cetera. You don't read a tremendous amount about Biden planning to have a policy change. But it's fair to look at this with a jaundiced eye. This is obviously, how much this is going to help from electoral standpoint, your mileage may vary. But this is people backdooring these stories as a way of indicating where they're headed in the future. Now, insiders, I don't know. But if they were really afraid of funding and whatnot, I don't think that's the issue. I think it's here in this piece. And in the statement, the vice president has made it clear, that she stands by the Biden-Harris administration policies. She does that as vice president. She's vice president now. It's the same thing as I follow precedent when I'm a circuit court judge.
Right.
When I'm Supreme Court judge, I make precedent. Mm-hmm. Again, there's no way to know. Really, ultimately, what it comes down to, from my perspective, is Donald Trump can use Palestinian as a slur. If Harris did that, it would tank her campaign. So you know where any power to influence Harris lies. It may not be enough to influence her as president, but to the extent that there is any power, it's within the constituency that is voting for Harris.
Yep.
Not the constituency that's voting for Trump. This isn't someone I just saw an IM saying, like, I agree with you guys, but you guys really seem to like Harris and whatnot. I don't give a freaking crap about, like, I don't have a favorite, like, I don't, like, I like Bernie. I think AOC is, like, the future of the center of the Democratic Party. And I think that's a good thing. But I don't, it's not a question of liking or not. I want Trump to lose. The person who's going to defeat Trump, the only person who can defeat Trump is Harris. That's it. There's nobody else. It's not me. It's not Emma. It's not Jill Stein. It's not Cornel West. It's not Chase, whatever that guy's name is, the libertarian. It's nobody else. There's only one person who is going to beat Donald Trump if Donald Trump is defeated. And to me, it's not just Trump. It's Republicans. Because I have no influence over Republicans.
None of us do, because we're not voting for. I mean, that's what it's about. Who we can put into power, who's most receptible to our pressure, like who has the pressure points where we can push. And
that doesn't
are we
mean
going to be in the room where we could push said pressure points? Can't push Biden. You can't. But that's the other thing.
Although
he's
not the nominee, and to some extent,
yes,
there is no doubt in my mind that Gaza was part of that.
And we knew, everybody knew in the 2020 primary that Kamala Harris and Biden were from different schools or different eras of politics, right? That they were different politicians. Bradley and I had this exercise, maybe we were talking off camera, about if we were to go through and list who those candidates were in 2020, where Kamala Harris would have been on a list of people who we would have preferred to win. She would have been ahead of Biden, right? 100%. We would have said that at the time. We would have said that over Cory Booker, over Amy Klobuchar. There were a bunch of Democrats in that race where, just from where her perspective is relative to those people, who we would have preferred. So I don't think that we can have any honest conversation about this without saying, from a perspective of ideology, Kamala Harris, improvement on Biden on this issue, or on many issues, right? In terms of where her mind is at and where her frame of reference comes from. It's not the guy that eulogized Strom Thurmond. She's not the guy who eulogized Strom Thurmond. Okay, she's somebody who comes from a different school of thought, at least even marginally. So that's what we're saying here. Is just that it's a bit of a difference in terms of pressuring her.
It's 2:44.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
But you agree with that, right? In terms of if we were to look, because we haven't really had this conversation, if we were to look back on those candidates.
I think look, there's, prior to Harris being the nominee, I felt that Joe Biden was singularly bad on Israel in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And I do not believe we will ever have a Democratic president who is going to be as bad as Biden. That doesn't mean that we're going to get one that's going to be good. I mean, wherever people draw that line. But I think that Israel will condition aid.
Keir Starmer's labor just, conditioned aid. I think, we could get, if we can have the pressure points, and it's different. The UK does not supply the majority of Israel's arms that they import. I mean, that's the United States.
I think the politics are changing, and they're changing in the Democratic Party.
Yep.
I mean, there's a reason why AIPAC has to deploy $50 million in, 3 Democratic primaries, or more than 50 million, whatever it is, but none in the Republican primaries. It is because the Democratic Party is shifting. It is in its nascent stages of shifting. We're not seeing it at the electoral level. We have to figure out a way of dealing with this huge influx of money in these primaries. But that money is being expended because that is where the threat is from the perspective of AIPAC. That's just the reality. And people can make their own assessments as to whether that's, sufficient for them to engage with the system. But, before I would vote for Jill Stein, personally, I would leave it blank.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I'd also just
To
say
show that I'm voting down ballot, but I'm not voting for the president.
for the president.
Yeah.
And
again, that's like also.
yeah. But when people say there's no evidence, like maybe there's no evidence for Harris being better or worse, or there's no evidence for Harris being definitively better than Biden, we'll say. But there's no evidence showing that she's aligned with Biden's conservatism throughout his entire career as it relates to this issue. So it's more about like an absence of evidence and then reading the tea leaves about her political ideology and what that means as it relates to Zionism. So
One I am Jewish Nev. If we condition aid to Israel, why not condition aid to Palestine? I got news for you. We already do.
oh yeah.
We already do. Those built-in conditions already exist there. This is an exception to the rule. Israel is the Leahy rule and law, I should say. Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.